Hi, welcome to Nomadic Diaries. My name is Doreen Cumberford. Today's conversation is with Kirtika van Hunen-Malla, and who is a certified cross-cultural trainer, a consultant, a speaker, and also an award-winning author. She recently authored the book, When Cultures Meet. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Kirtika. Dreaming of living a functional, bold life overseas is one thing. Making it work? That's where reality kicks in. I'm Doreen Cumberford, and after living in 8 countries across 4 continents over several decades, I understand the real challenges you're facing, from visa headaches, cultural confusion, to raising third culture kids and maintaining relationships across time zones. Welcome to Nomadic Diaries, where we get real about international living. Whether you're building a career in Barcelona, seeking community in Singapore, or explaining to your kids why you're moving again, you are not alone. Join me for honest conversations with global authors and researchers, and citizens who've been there, done that, and are still figuring it out. Ready to turn your overseas challenges into opportunities? Find Nomadic Diaries wherever you get your podcasts. So, Kirtika, I'm so excited that you're here today, and thank you for joining us. And the first question I have for you is, how has the Eastern philosophical approach to living and working shaped your understanding of living across cultures or borders?
Interesting question, Doreen. Indeed, I am in a way very happy that I spent a lot of time in my home country learning the Eastern ways before I came to the West, because I really needed that baggage which I had brought with me to be able to survive here in the cultural sense.
Interesting.
There are certain things that came naturally to adjust, for example, and to be able to in my culture, for example, you have to learn to accept a lot of things, and that's how I was brought up, and to be content with some things. So in that sense, it came a bit more naturally to a certain extent, that you can accept some things that happen and you adapt yourself to it, because that is also what is given to you. So adapting comes also naturally, so there is not so much of a fighting or a clash as such.
So your background, you came from India/Nepal, right on the border there, is that correct? The Holland.
Now, my father
Uh-huh.
was Nepali
Uh-huh.
and my mother is Indian. My father is not alive anymore, but my mother, she's still alive and she's Indian. So that's how I was born between 2 cultures also.
Yes.
So a certain amount of culture, in the sense the religion, where I come from is almost the same in both cultures.
Yes.
There are a lot of difference in India from where you come from. My mother comes from West Bengal, so I was brought up in West Bengal. So it
Yes.
is different than other states of India also.
Yes.
So the culture is also very, very different, let's say, in India.
Yes. And that's a lot like I think the US of A as well. The culture in the South is very different from the Northeast, and
Right.
it's wonderful that you come from such a rich background of culture. So you were a cross-cultural kid to start with, and then you moved to the West and you brought some of this Eastern philosophy with you. Can you give me a concrete example of a behavior of an Eastern philosophy that you brought with you?
Yes, because of an intercultural marriage, I immediately realized that is the pausing. If there is a dialogue, or even if it is an argument or debate, I had to really have the pause and the time to really think and put my words together before I could reply. But before I could reply, the other person was already on the next subject or to the next question. So that is something I used to feel sometimes in my professional life. I used to feel left out, or like, oh, when do I say it? Like, nobody seems to be interested in my answer, even if the question was there. So that is how I used to feel when I was first here in the West, in the Netherlands, let's say, when I was really working here. So that was a huge gap, which I really had to
Yes.
face. Does that
Yes.
answer your question?
Yes, it does. So are you in an intercultural marriage?
Yes, my husband is Dutch.
Your husband is Dutch. I too am
Yes.
in an intercultural marriage. I am from Scotland and my husband is from the USA, although he's really a TCK, a third culture kid. And so
Okay.
it's it it's different, isn't it? And so this is an example. You had to learn to be in conversation. That must have taken a lot of energy for you to listen and pay attention and start to understand the rhythm in Holland, did it?
Yes, also in my marriage, my husband would ask me, "Oh, you're silent. Why don't you say something?" And I had to think, I thought like, "Oh, do I have to say something? Oh, what do I say?" So I really needed the time to put my thoughts into order before I could really reply. So I was used to that. So
So I have a question. So do you believe that the thinking in the the eastern part of the world is slower, or is it the communication that we're talking about here?
we are talking about the communication, but you're right. If you look at the time,
Mhm.
we have a cyclic time. Seasons come back every time. Summer comes every year. Winter comes every year. So it's cyclic. So why worry or why haste? Because it will come again. So that
Yeah.
makes us also a bit slow, I think, in life, taking life slowly. Not slow as in lazy or anything, but I mean to say
Yes.
there is more, no, there's no hurry.
So it's just a question of pacing that we're talking about here and rhythm. Is that correct?
Yeah. And I see that a lot in now in the business cases of Dutch working with India or Nepal, that they are having the clashes in that situation about the pacing. Yeah.
Yes, because we all pace ourselves differently. Now, I witness this. I get to witness this in Mexico, where I noticed that because I have lived in America a bit, I noticed that my American self sometimes is impatient. I want this to happen.
Now,
And there is more of sort of a step backwards in the Mexican community and they pace themselves. However, they have a super high intention rhythm. And when the Mexican culture is in action and is in momentum, it is unstoppable.
wow.
And
Now,
so I have learned or I am learning, I hope, to pace myself with that because it's really different. So, what does it mean when you say understanding the culture is not about the other? Tell me about this.
yes, I use this a lot in my training. For example, if a person is brought up in a culture where if you go to a restaurant together, they usually pay for their friends and for themselves, and they come to a culture where they go together, even if they're best friends, they split the bill, or you pay for your own meal.
Mm,
And then I ask them, what would be your first thought that goes through your mind? And people have, oh, that's not done in my culture. I wouldn't think of doing such a thing. And I would be very surprised, or I would find it stingy. So that sort of reactions I get. And then
mm,
I say, do you realize that you are comparing with your own culture? Like you're saying, in my culture, I say, why is it surprising? They say, because in your culture, you're saying it's different, so you find it surprising. In your culture, it's different, so you're finding it annoying, or those sort of things. So then I say, so do you realize that you are always using yourself or your culture as a reference point? So,
mm.
which means actually, culture is not so much about them or the other culture, it's more about your own culture. So you are in your
Yeah.
own culture at that moment and you're using it as a reference point. So that is what I mean by culture is not about them, but it's about yourself, your own culture.
I find that very interesting because I just spent 2 months back in my home culture in the UK. And although I had lived in America for 10 years and then for another 6 years later, I was able to sort of excavate an older self, like my Scottish self. And I realize that sometimes I am reacting as a Scot and sometimes I'm reacting as an American. The question is about when you're understanding that culture is not about the other, sometimes we need to self-reflect about who we're being at that moment. Who are we being? Which culture are we identifying with? What is the framework that we are reacting from?
Yeah, or responding from. It depends on what we call the switching, code switching, which you just mentioned. Your two aspects is you were code switching, and sometimes it becomes automatic that somebody can really switch codes very well when needed and at appropriate points. So that would be ideal for people in intercultural situations, actually, if they can switch codes.
So code switching is a good thing. Would you speak a little bit more about code switching and what it means when we're living overseas and we are working and living with other cultures? Could you just, for the listeners, give a little bit more information on code switching, please?
What I mean to say by code switching is that, like you just gave an example, is when you are in another environment, another culture than your own, and you know something about the other culture also, then according to the situation, you can act or react or respond according to the situation. So it could be your own cultural aspect which you can use at that moment, or you realize, oh, at this moment I have to use the situation that is good for the culture in this country where I am, or your host culture. Host country culture. So that's what I mean by code switching. That helps a person to navigate cultures better. So in a way, it is an instrument, that a tool people can use in a positive way to be able to code switch without losing your own identity, of course.
Yes, yes. And that is very tricky, isn't it? Because I kind of see myself as having parts to my identity, and I don't know if you do this, but I feel like there's a geographical map in my head and my heart and my stomach. And so when my head and my heart and my gut are all aligned, I'm good. I'm really balanced. But if I feel a little like I've lived in a lot of countries, and I feel like I've taken on some of these values or behaviors from other countries. And that can make it really tricky. So what do you say to the expat who has lived in so many places about the use of code switching?
That is, yeah, it's very interesting actually, in the sense it is more than just code switching. I also give acculturation.
Uh-huh.
And there, I have a lot of clients who usually say, "I miss a sense of belonging in this country."
Yes.
And then there are a lot of aspects to it. It cannot be explained in just a few words. One aspect is that that person's identity is very important. Actually, I had that for the next question, but I can explain it now, in the sense, in your podcast with Chris, he talked about the avocado, which I
Yes.
also use, but I don't call it avocado. It is uh, the aspect of the Eastern philosophy, is
Mm-hmm.
that your essence of who you are is very important. So you have to know who you are. It sounds a bit spiritual, but it's not about your ego or your body physically. It's more about, indeed, your core spiritual being. Who are you? And once you know who that is, what your cultural norms are, what is your way of working, what is your preference, that makes the core very strong. And once you are strong there, I try to do that in training as well. First, to make that person strong enough so that that person, when they go to another culture, they don't feel scared of losing their identity, because they realize the identity is the inner core, which
Mm.
will never be destroyed or lost. So once the core is there, then what I said about this person who said a sense of belonging, then I tell them, for example, if you stayed in some countries, I give a story about the red dots and the yellow squares.
Yeah.
There are two countries with yellow squares. Do you know the story? I don't know.
No, tell me.
There are two. I just said, I use a metaphor of two countries. I say, okay, there's a country with yellow squares. and a country with red dots. And
Uh-huh.
one day, some of the red dots went to the yellow country. They stayed for some time, a couple of years and more, 5, 6 years. And then they took some cultural aspects from the yellow box squares as their own. So they made a synergy of it, maybe. And then, because of that, instead of a red dot, they change into purple oval, let's say.
Yes.
Without realizing, they become a purple oval. So when they come back to their country of red dots, they don't fit in because they become purple ovals. And when they go back to the yellow squares, they don't fit in either because they become oval purples. So they say, does that mean I'll never belong anywhere? So I said, no, the idea is to find other ovals. They could be another color because your color was a mixture of red and yellow. Maybe somebody else is also become an oval, but another color, maybe green or some other color. It depends on the culture mix of the other person, but it is an oval. So I tell them, if you find all those ovals and try to be friends with them, or then you will find your like-minded people who you don't have to, or you just say a word and they understand what you mean, because you. So that's what I say about a sense of belonging. So that way you can find your own community to belong to, if necessary.
Definitely.
Yeah, so that also gives you the aspect of being strong, and the idea is making a synergy of the other culture. So finding all the positive things. For example, when I came to the Netherlands, I was used to eating 3 meals warm, and here in the Netherlands, they eat only 1 meal warm in the evening, and breakfast and lunch is not at all warm. So I really missed it. And I used to make warm lunch for myself till I started working, and I realized you can't take. Yeah, I couldn't make warm meals in the office. So of course it's handy for me just to take sandwiches like the Dutch do.
Yes.
So that doesn't mean I lose my cultural identity. It's just that, okay, but it's still there in my core. So when it is cold like today, I at least prefer a cup of soup just to have the feeling like I had something warm for lunch. So
Yes.
that way, I mean to say, it's not about canceling the other culture. It's about taking what you need from the other culture to make it into a nice synergy, and yeah, make it work for you.
That's
And
perfect.
also, very important is not to lose your cultural identity.
That's very true. Now, on the subject of food, since we're on the subject of food for a moment, what kind of food do you cook at home? Are you cooking Dutch? Are you cooking Indian? Are you cooking Indian crossed with Nepali?
I cook everything because I like to cook as long as there's somebody who likes to eat. So my husband likes to eat, so I like to cook. So I cook
Very good.
everything from Western to Nepali. Only Nepali and Indian takes very long. So if I don't have much time because it's not fast cooking, and I need some fast cooking, then I turn to some Western. Sometimes I make Mexican also. You know,
Oh, very good.
yeah.
Very
So
good.
it's a combination of everything because yeah, I like everything actually. So
I
it's a
think
mixture.
food is a wonderful way to cross cultures with other people, to share different foods, to share our traditions, and as we're recording this actually on Thanksgiving, there's a lot of cultural interchange around the subject of just the food, and so I'm thrilled to hear that you're doing your cross-cultural cooking. So,
Yes.
what is the one fundamental misconception that professionals often have about cross-cultural communication? What do we get wrong?
I have or in my experience, I should say, is mostly the one aspect where it usually goes wrong is the presumption like, now you are in this country, so I presume you know how we work, I presume how we communicate, you know everything, so you're going to get everything the way we do it here in this country, for
Mm.
example. And that's where it goes wrong because I've asked, or let's say confronted people with questions where like, oh, is that so? I didn't realize. And a very small, it is not a very positive story anecdote, but it is a nice example. Is when there were a surge of refugees in Europe from Syria, I think it was that year. Um, and in Germany, they misbehaved during the firecracker show or something in public. They really misbehaved, which of course I don't support as well.
Mm.
But the next day, the Dutch newspaper was full of, you see, they don't respect our culture and our cultural values and norms. And the first thing that went into my mind was, oh, and who was there anybody who gave them the information about our norms and our cultural aspects? You see what I mean? So I was like, I was really surprised because I thought, oh, and did somebody explain to them how we work here? Did somebody explain to them what the
Yeah.
norms and cultures are here? It doesn't make it nice or positive, but that was just a question I went through. And
Yes.
surprisingly, after a few weeks, there was research, and I think Denmark was the only country who had indeed immediately the first week given a session on how we work here and what the norms and our cultural aspects are. So at least
Mm,
you give them a chance to realize that it is very, very different
yes.
in your host country than where you come from. And that's
That's
not,
interesting. That's very interesting because I remember the couple 2 or 3 times I visited the Netherlands for professional work over the last 10 years. I was introduced to the fact that the Netherlands had an minister of expats, or don't they have an expat division, or they had something in that was supported by The Hague and the government in order to give expats a little training when they arrived in the country. And that's one of the few countries that I've ever seen that in.
that's interesting.
Yes.
Yeah,
I thought that would be helpful if all countries did that, right?
that's what I mean. Yeah, that at
So,
least you give them a chance. Yes.
yes, what wisdom from the Eastern philosophies do you find the most important or the most transformative when we talk about professional interactions, when we're crossing cultures and going to different countries? Is there some crux of the Eastern philosophies that we could perhaps take with us? We've talked about pacing, we've talked about communication, we've talked about perhaps slowing things down and having an explanation. Is there any other wisdom that you would recommend we consider?
Yes, an interesting question. And I would say actually two things come to mind. The one I already talked about a little bit is the self-awareness.
Mm,
Because culture begins with yourself, and not only with the self in the sense that we are referring to our culture every time, but the
mm,
self is. Um, I think I can clarify it with a nice anecdote. I had a young client who was from his country, and he said, "We are 15. We came with 15 of us for work here, and 14 of them they couldn't cope with the culture, so they left the country. So they left the Netherlands. I'm alone."
mm.
And I'm very scared. So I told him, "What are you scared of?" And he said, "I'm so scared to lose my cultural identity." And then I said, "Okay, let's talk about that. What is your cultural identity that you are scared of losing?" And then he hadn't a clue in that sense, because he had never really, he knew what he was going to lose and what he was afraid of, which is a genuine fear for everybody, I think. Only he wasn't, like most people, he wasn't aware of what those identities were. What was now important to you that you don't want to lose and you want to keep it for yourself, and what is it that you don't mind putting water by the wine. And so in that sense, in the training also, I make sure they are very self-aware. That is very important, I think, for all expats or anybody who's going to interact or live in another country, that they are very, very aware of what their own cultural identity is, in the sense of their own cultural values and norms, what they have, what they are not willing to give up. It's very good to know this is something I will never give up. And
Yes.
also to have other aspects where they are like, okay, that aspect I don't mind mixing water with the wine. That is very important. The self-awareness, which is what I said, it sounds very spiritual, but it is mostly, I think, embedded in all Eastern philosophy. The
Yes.
self-awareness of who you are and what you are, so that you stand very strong in your shoes for whatever else happens. And there you should begin there, I think. And the second wisdom is the wisdom of responding. And what I mean by that is, you have heard about reading the air in Japan, I think.
Yes.
And in South Korea, it is something similar. It's called nunchi. And that's something also in most Eastern countries is the pause. What I was talking about is the moment you take to really feel what the other is feeling, understand what the other is feeling and what's happening. Because reaction is something spontaneous and you don't think about it and you react and things go wrong. That's why cultures clash. Whereas if you take the pause and you read the air, or you are self aware, all that combined gives you the chance to respond. And responding is thinking about the situation, going over in your mind what is now the right action to do, and take the time to respond to a situation. And yeah, that is what I told you about my upbringing as well, which clashed here a lot. But I
Well,
think,
I have a question for you. So, where does intuition come into it? Because, reading the air, I think, is sort of using the muscle, the mental muscle we have called intuition. It's understanding the context. It's leaning into the situation. It's getting a sense of what else is going on. So, do you ever refer to it as intuition, or do you have ways to talk about it as intuition?
yes, in a spiritual form, I think you could call it intuition. Sorry, intuition.
Intuition,
Uh,
yes.
but in certain ways, people wouldn't use that word, maybe.
Mm,
Because it sounds so vague and spiritual, especially for people who don't believe in those sort of things. I think I could call it more, yeah, it's like inner feeling. Indeed, you're right. It's a sort of a sixth sense,
yes,
which
it
could
is.
be intuition. Yes,
And neuroscience is currently demonstrating that it's something we all have, maybe in different amounts and to different degrees. But a lot of the modern science is now saying that yes, we all have these other, we have access to other mental faculties other than the ones that we normally use, right?
reflecting back to the way I was brought up and other children are brought up in India and Nepal, we are brought up with a lot of meditation and a lot of slowing down and pacing as a child also. So you
Yeah.
don't, in a way, they enhance your response rather than react. So
Yes.
they teach you to, as a child, also to respond rather than to react. Of course, the child reacts as well. I'm not saying they're perfect, but I think that
Yeah.
gives you an extra start if you are in an intercultural situation, that you also have that, call it intuition, call it sixth sense, to observe what's happening. So it's a combination of observing also somebody's body language,
Sure.
expression maybe,
Sure.
and the air for example, in Nunji, they explain even before you enter the room, you should feel before you open your mouth. So it is a way of, that's also a philosophical wisdom of the East. They say that is why I also say is in my training, we have two eyes, two ears, but one mouth. So
Yeah.
you observe extra, you hear extra, but you speak only once. So make sure you speak something valuable when you open your mouth. So that is the way children are brought up in that sense. So I think it all results actually to self-awareness and responding to a situation, in a cultural situation also.
Very good. So you identify or you self-identify as a world citizen, and that you have obviously a clear passion for people and cultures. Can you tell me what are the characteristics, or what do you think are the best characteristics of a world citizen?
Wow. World citizens aren't perfect, okay? Just to be clear. um, I usually say I identify myself as a world citizen because the question, which is sometimes rude, but people don't know it, so they say, "Where are you from?" And
Yeah.
to that, I always say I am a world citizen because for me it's very difficult to identify with any other culture after being born between cultures and living in the Netherlands for more than 30, for almost 30 years. It's
Mm,
very difficult to say I belong there because I feel I have an affinity or a belonging everywhere. So I
yes.
think a world citizen is somebody who feels a bit at home everywhere.
Uh-huh. Yes.
And world citizen, I'm talking about myself only because then I cannot talk about other people, of course, is that feeling at home anywhere is in my heart. My home is in my heart. So I take it anywhere I go. So I think that makes adapting what easier and creating my own home easier for me. If you
Yes.
have that attitude of
Yeah.
you don't have to be in one place to belong. So tomorrow, if I had to move and live somewhere else, I think I can create my own happiness and my own home.
Mm,
But it all takes boils down to your character, your culture, your background, and a lot of
yes.
aspects, I think. So in a world citizen, to answer your question, I think is somebody who can really find happiness and a home building in any situation or in any country. So the country doesn't matter. You don't identify with the nationality of a country, I think, and more as being human, and that you
Yes.
combine with humans.
I love that. I love that. I have a terminology that I use. It's called global heartedness.
Ah,
And
wonderful. Yeah.
I talk about the global heart. And, so what does that feel like to me? And to me, it's always the human to human heartfelt connection that I can experience with anyone from any place on the planet. And the more I open my mindset, the more we train ourselves to be global citizens, I think the more our hearts have to open, and we have to become compassionate, not just for ourselves, but for all sorts of other experiences as humans, right?
Right. If only people knew we are human. That's the only thing that exists. No borders. That would be so wonderful.
Yeah, it would be. We would love to do away without borders, right?
Yeah.
So, I would like to go into the lightning round, and now this is just for fun.
Okay.
So, just say what comes to the top of your head, all right? And then we'll talk a little bit about your books. So, if you could instantly become fluent in one language, which language would it be?
Italian.
An Indian gal living in Holland is going to learn Italian. Excellent. And why is that? Why Italian?
I went to Italy for the first time and I fell in love with the country, culture, and the language. Oh my God, the language. Yeah, it
Yes.
was, I don't know, I just had, it just touched my heart. And since then, I go to Italy every summer and I'm trying my best to learn it, but I'm not yet fluent in
Well done, you. Well done.
it.
Can you describe home in 3 words?
Home is where the heart is.
Mm,
Home is where there is lots of love.
mm,
And a home is a place where you can be who you are.
I
That's
love
what
it.
I think a home is.
Yes. Yeah, lovely. If you could teleport yourself to any country for the next 24 hours, as of today, where would you go?
Japan. I've
Ah,
never been there.
ah, I had the privilege of living there for 2 years. I highly recommend it. What is one change that has happened for you as a result of being a global citizen or living overseas?
Is what we always call the platinum rule.
Ah, I
The
love
rule
that.
I learned not to treat the other as I want to be treated, but to treat the other as that other person wants to be treated. It was not only a cultural thing, but for me, it was also a self development awareness that happened.
Mm,
So I think that is something that I would
that's
say
all.
to your question.
Very good. And finally, what is one piece of advice you would give to your younger self about as it relates to travel and living overseas and crossing cultures? What would you tell your younger self?
That once you get older in life, things get much better.
Oh,
Things
good.
become more better. You are not insecure anymore. You are more sure of yourself, and
Good.
that life gets better.
Very good. Thank you very much. Well, thank you for a very good lightning round, Kirtika.
Thank
Please,
you.
could you tell us a little bit about your recent book, When Cultures Meet? What drew you to writing this book, please?
After giving, every time I give a training, I use a lot of anecdotes and business cases, and it is actually a result of 25 years of research, literature research, as well as interviewing people from all walks of life and from different cultural backgrounds. I had published a book in Dutch, my first Dutch book, in a language that's not my own.
Amazing.
And it was in 2020. After I launched it, the second lockdown was uh,
Mm.
initiated. So this year, after 4 years, I took out the same book in English, and it's called When Cultures Meet.
Oh, well done.
Yes, and it's full of the same stories or anecdotes and what people can use in business or web.
Where can we find the book?
It's in Amazon.
Amazon? Okay.
Yes, and of course, I was very happy to receive an international award for the book this year in March.
Congratulations. That's
Thank you very
wonderful.
much.
So you've heard
And
it. Go
sorry,
ahead. Go ahead.
yeah, I was about to say it is available in Amazon bookshops. It's in ebook as well as for the hard copy.
Very good. Thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this has been a wonderful time. I'm really grateful for this time that we spent together, Kirtika, in talking about the value of living overseas. We covered a lot. We covered a lot in terms of the things that are important when we move across cultures, how we can change. We talked about intuition. We talked about all the places that you would love to go and eat and the languages you would love to speak. Do you have one thought that you would like to leave with our listeners before we conclude today?
Yes. First of all, I would like to thank you because I had a wonderful session with you. It was wonderful being interviewed by you in your podcast. Thank you, Doreen. There is one thing I would just like to give, and that is, of course, please know yourself and stand strong in your shoes before even if you think about reacting, interacting in an intercultural situation, and you'll be good.
Know yourself. That is a wonderful thing.
Know thyself, yes.
Know thyself. Thank you so much, Kirtika. This has been great. Thank you very much for the conversation.